I'm Melanie Meehan and I will be discussing whether prison is an effective form of punishment. To understand if punishment can be defined as just, we must first establish whether a social institution is perceived as legitimate. To be legitimate, an institution must be morally justified. Within the penal system, this perception is lacking. Imprisonment inflicts physical discomfort, psychological suffering, indignity and general unhappiness on offenders. Not only is the offender stripped of their liberty, by extension, the absence of a loved one causes suffering to the offender's family. At a cost of £40,000 per inmate, it is difficult to see how this can be the most effective form of punishment. Punishment is expected to act as a deterrent, be reformative and also preventative. The aims and purposes of punishment recognised in English law are punishment of offenders. This entails retribution and denunciation, deduction of crime, including reduction by deterrence, the reform and rehabilitation of offenders, protection of the public through incapacitation, and the making of reparation by offenders to those affected by the offence. Retribution and reductivism tend to be prioritised within the criminal justice system. Retributivism justifies punishment as being deserved by the offender as reparation for their offence. Reductivism sees incapacitation as a tool to reduce the occurrence of crime. Sometimes both practices can be combined to create a hybridised approach to punishment, which is known as limiting retributivism. This approach ensures punishment is proportionate to the crime committed, but also looks to combat the future reoccurrence of crime. Reductivism justifies punishment by viewing incapacitation as a tool to limit the future consequences of crime. The concept is based on the moral reasoning of Bentham's utilitarian theory, which sees punishment as morally right. From a utilitarian perspective, the pain and unhappiness caused to the offenders is outweighed by the potential effects a future crime may inflict. This can be summed up in this quote: "Pain and unhappiness caused to the offender is outweighed by the unpleasantness caused to other people in the future which is prevented." So how does punishment reduce crime? Both the reductivist and retributivist approach to crime use imprisonment as a deterrent to the offender and wider society. The consequence of imprisonment is seen to outweigh the desirability of the criminal act and discourages the offender from reoffending through fear of repeating this punishment. However, this approach can actually have anti-deterrent effects on prisoners who are often stigmatised upon release. Labelling theory suggests that through labelling an individual as criminal, the self-image shifts from the law-abiding citizen to deviant, the effect of which means they associate with this new sense of self and tend to reoffend. The process can also be seen to act as a general deterrence to wider society, as they hear of the offender's punishment and do not want to experience a similar consequence, which encourages them to remain law-abiding citizens. Similarly, this effect can be dispelled as the majority of society obey the law and are less likely to offend based on the moral reaction of those around them. New sheet. The reductivist method of incapacitation protects society from violent criminals through physically preventing them from reoffending. Sentences such as life imprisonment ensure that offenders are not released until they no longer pose a threat to society. Punishment reduces crime through rehabilitation. The treatment model sees punishment reduces crime through rehabilitation. The treatment model sees crime as a symptom of mental illness, which can be treated through methods such as cognitive behavioural therapy. Through teaching offenders methods to alter and control their behaviour, they can be taught an acceptable way to conduct themselves within society upon release, which will stop recidivism. In contrast to reductivism, retributivism focuses on the initial instance of crime rather than repressing an offender's capacity to reoffend in the future. The approach focuses on punishment being proportionate to the moral culpability of an offender and advocates the use of a tariff to secure punishment varies in severity based on the seriousness of an offence. In contrast to the reductivist approach, the offender has the right to go free once their punishment has been served, rather than remaining incarcerated based on their potential to reoffend. The concept of denunciation believes punishment should reflect wider society's abhorrence to the crime committed, and therefore maintaining social order amongst the majority. summed up in the following quote: "The punishment of grave crimes should adequately reflect the revulsion." This concept can be summed up in the following quote: "The punishment of grave crimes should adequately reflect the revulsion felt by the great majority of citizens for them. It is a mistake to consider the object of punishment as being deterrent or reformative or preventative and nothing else. The ultimate justification of punishment is not that it is a deterrent, but that it is the emphatic denunciation by the community of the crime." In contrast to these methods, restorative justice aims to reintegrate the offender into society by repairing the relationship between the offender, the victim, and their community which has been damaged by the criminal act. The offender is encouraged to accept responsibility, acknowledge wrongfulness, and make amends with those affected by the offence. This process can be carried out through victim-offender mediation, conferencing, and citizen panels. The aim is to reach an agreed solution which will restore the equilibrium lost through the commission of crime. This approach offers a form of punishment which does not infringe the offender's rights, but instead offers reintegrative shaming, whereby an offender is made aware of their wrongdoing through society's response to the offence, yet starts the reintegrative process into society through reparations such as community service. Now, to better understand contemporary punishment, we must look to the origins of theory surrounding crime and punishment. Cesare Beccaria believed there should be a fixed penalty for every offence, known as a tariff, and that tariffs should be proportionate to the crime committed. In contrast to the practice of mitigating circumstances in the modern criminal justice system, he also believed offenders should be held fully responsible for the crime committed. His theory focused around the notion of social contract, whereby governments should only have the power to punish to an extent that would protect society from the crimes of others. He believed punishment should be public in order to appropriate the offence, but he opposed capital punishment as he saw it as an inefficient deterrent to wider society. In contrast to Beccaria's approach to crime, Jeremy Bentham believed that punishment should ensure the greatest happiness of the greatest number, and therefore disregarded the consideration of human rights and opposed the concept of social contract theory. Similarly to Beccaria, Bentham saw punishment as justified, yet believed that punishment of the right kind could reduce crime, rather than considering the severity of an individual's offence. Bentham is well known for his development of the Panopticon prison, which featured a central observation tower to act as a constant form of surveillance over prisoners. He also believed that productive work would help prisoners to develop the rational work habits of law-abiding citizens. In contrast to Beccaria, Bentham saw prisoners as presenting little rationality or responsibility, and therefore allowed for mitigating circumstances such as duress, infancy, and insanity. Because of this, he believed they could learn to be more rational through reform. Whilst Beccaria didn't see incarceration as a useful form of punishment, Bentham saw prison, in the form of the Panopticon prison, as an effective form of punishment. Cesare Lombroso opposed Beccaria and Bentham's theories as he believed crime occurred as a result of factors and processes that could be rationalised through scientific investigation. These factors were not necessarily genetic, but environmental factors which influenced criminals to commit crime. Lombroso took the deterministic view that humans did not act of their own free will, but instead it was out of their control. His theory completely disregards the concept of retributivism and sees criminals as people who require treatment, thus favouring incapacitation and reform. Lombroso's theory favours an indeterminate sentence, as it is difficult to determine just how much treatment an individual may need to be fully reformed. Bottomley and Hudson critiqued Lombroso's positivist approach and the concept of individualised treatment, as they saw the cause of crime as structural rather than attributed to the individual. They also argued that the concept of individualised treatment provides criminal justice experts with too much autonomy in the length of sentencing. Furthermore, they argued the theory lacks due process and proportionality, as it can treat equal crimes in varying ways on the basis of an offender supposedly being less receptive to treatment. They also saw the view that offenders are not rational or responsible for their action as an insult to human dignity. Bottomley and Hudson take a similar approach to Beccaria in favour of due process and proportionality. Therefore, to conclude, it is clear that retributivism and reductivism are no longer an effective form of punishment on the basis that they fail to acknowledge human rights